What if I told you that the very machines that fed entire nations destroyed the companies that built them? We're talking billion-dollar giants, names that dominated every single farm in America, reduced to rubble almost overnight. These weren't small startups. These were industrial legends with over a century of history each, and in some cases the most revolutionary machine they ever built was the last thing they ever made. Here are 10 farming machines that bankrupted their makers. Number 1. International Harvester 2+2 Tractors. The 3388, 3588, and 3788. International Harvester entered the 1980s at the absolute top of its game. The company had just reported $8.4 billion in sales in 1979, and in September 1976 it had launched what many considered its greatest ever tractor line, the 86 Series Pro Ag line, including the 135 horsepower 1086, the 146 horsepower 1486, and the mighty 161 horsepower 1586, a turbocharged 6-cylinder diesel built for the hardest field work in the country. Those tractors were beloved, but it was the experimental machines that came next, and their disastrous timing that helped bring everything crashing down. In 1979, IBM introduced an engineering experiment unlike anything on the market, the 3388 and 3588, known as the 2+2 four-wheel drive line. The concept was audacious. Engineers literally took two 1086 rear ends and connected them together through a transfer case, creating an articulated four-wheel drive machine with twice the traction. A third model, the 3788, followed in 1980. On paper, it was innovation. In reality, it was a warning sign. These tractors performed adequately in the field, but they never sold well. They were complex, expensive to service, and farmers were skeptical of the unusual design. iHedge had invested heavily in developing and manufacturing them, just as the worst farm equipment crisis in American history was about to begin. In November 1979, the same year the 3388 and 3588 launched, 30,000 UAW union members went on strike against International Harvester. The work stoppage lasted 172 days. While IH sat paralyzed, John Deere quietly captured market share that IH would never see again. Then, the grain embargo. Then interest rates climbing past 20%. Then farms going bankrupt by the thousands. IH had yards full of unsold equipment, including those 2+2 machines nobody wanted. The company lost $374.8 million in fiscal 1980. Another $96.4 million in the first quarter of 1981 alone. By fiscal 1981, total losses had hit $635.7 million on $7 billion in sales. By fiscal 1982, the losses reached $822 million for continuing operations, one of the largest single-year corporate losses in American history at the time. The company that had produced its 5 millionth tractor in February 1974, the first manufacturer in history to reach that number, was now on life support. In September 1981, IH negotiated an emergency debt restructuring with 225 creditor banks. In 1982, it sold its construction equipment business to Dresser Industries and its axle and transmission business to Dana Corporation. Worldwide employment was slashed by 34% to just 43,290 workers. By 1985, I sold its entire farm equipment division. The Farmall tractors, the 1086 line, the Pro Ag machines, the 2+2 experiments, all of it, to Tenneco's J.I. Case Company, which renamed it Case IH. The company that had once been larger than General Electric or General Motors renamed itself Navistar and escaped into truck manufacturing. Every last red tractor on every dealer lot was now someone else's problem. The 3388. The 3588, the 3788. Machines built with extraordinary engineering ambition launched at the worst possible moment, in the worst possible market. They didn't cause the collapse alone, but they were the last bold move of a company that was already out of time. Number 2. Allis-Chalmers 8070 and 4 W305. The Allis-Chalmers 8070 was, by most accounts, one of the finest tractors the company ever produced. Introduced in 1982, It sat at the top of the new 8000 series, featuring a turbocharged diesel engine producing 170 horsepower, one of the most advanced powertrains in its class. The four-model 8000 series lineup, the 8010, 8030, 8050 and the flagship 8070, was designed to be the machine that would finally make Allis-Chalmers competitive with John Deere in the high-power row crop segment. Meanwhile, at the very top of the Allis lineup sat the 4W305, the most powerful tractor Allis-Chalmers ever built. An articulated four-wheel drive monster putting out 305 horsepower, built for the largest commercial farming operations in the country. Both machines were produced from 1982 right up until the company folded in 1985, 3 years. That's all the time these magnificent machines had before everything ended. The problem wasn't the engineering, it was the economics. Allis-Chalmers had entered the early 1980s, deeply overextended. The company operated across too many industries: farm equipment, construction machinery, power generation, industrial machinery. It was a jack of all trades and master of none. When the farm crisis of 1980 hit, with interest rates spiking to 21.5%, commodity prices in freefall, and farm bankruptcies exploding across the Midwest, Allis had no financial cushion. The losses were catastrophic. $28.8 million in 1981, then over $200 million in 1982, then $130 million in 1983, then $103 million in 1984. 4 straight years of hemorrhaging cash, and beneath all of it sat a pension fund with $200 million in unfunded liabilities. There was no safety net. In 1985, Allis-Chalmers sold its entire agricultural division to Kluckner-Humboldt-Deutz AG of West Germany for just $107 million, a staggering $153 million below the division's book value of $260 million. The new owner, who renamed the brand Deutz Allis, immediately discontinued the iconic 8000 series tractors and their Persian orange paint. The machinery that had made those machines, the tooling, the assembly lines, was sold or scrapped. In December 1985, the last tractor rolled off the assembly line at the West Allis, Wisconsin plant. Someone had taped a handwritten sign to its front. It said, "That's all, folks. The end." 4 words. For a company founded in 1901, 84 years of agricultural history erased in a single fire sale. The 8070, perhaps the finest tractor Allis ever made, was discontinued before most of its first production run had even racked up serious hours in the field. Number 3. Steiger Panther 3ST310 and Tiger 3ST450. When John Steiger and his 2 sons Douglas and Maurice built a tractor in their Minnesota dairy barn in the winter of 1957 to 1958, they powered it with a Detroit 671 diesel engine and bolted together parts from whatever they could salvage. That original machine weighed roughly 15,000 pounds and accumulated over 10,000 hours of field time over the next decade. It is now in a museum in West Fargo, North Dakota. From that one barn-built machine, a company grew that would define what a serious 4-wheel drive tractor looked like. By the mid-1970s, Steiger's factory in Fargo, North Dakota, was producing a full line of articulated behemoths named after big cats. Each name indicated the chassis size and horsepower class. The Wildcat was the small chassis entry. The Cougar was the intermediate machine. The Cougar 3ST270, introduced in the early 1980s, produced 270 horsepower and was one of the most respected large tractors on the market. Then came the Panther 3ST310, a 310 horsepower beast powered by a Cummins engine, capable of pulling virtually any implement ever built. And at the top of the food chain sat the Tiger 3ST450, 450 horsepower, built for the largest dryland farms on the continent. These machines were genuinely legendary. Steiger had gone from $2 million in annual sales in 1971 to over $104 million per year by 1977, growth that required a brand new 420,000 square foot factory just to keep pace with demand. And then the farm crisis arrived and, within a few years, turned that factory into a ghost. By 1986, the same plant that had once built a new tractor every 18 minutes was operating at just 25% of its stated capacity. Fewer than 1 in 4 bays were active. The company's net worth was $44 million, but the banks were calling in the receivables. There was no operating cash left to run the business. In 1986, Steiger Tractor Incorporated filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Later that year, Tenneco Inc., the same company that had just purchased International Harvester's farm division and renamed it K-Swan-H, bought Steiger out of bankruptcy. The green Steiger Panther and Tiger tractors continued rolling off the line until 1990, when the brand was finally retired. Today, K-Si still uses the Steiger name on its largest four-wheel drive and quad-track machines. The name survived. The company that built it did not. Number 4. Minneapolis-Moline UDLX Comfort Tractor. In 1938, Minneapolis-Moline introduced what its engineers genuinely believed would revolutionize American farming. It was called the UDLX Comfort Tractor, a variant of their successful Model U Series tractor, specifically the U Deluxe, and it was unlike anything that had ever existed. The UDLX had an enclosed, fully weatherproofed cab on a farm tractor. It had a 283.7 cubic inch, 4-cylinder overhead valve gasoline engine producing 46 horsepower. It had a 5-speed synchromesh transmission, and in 5th gear, with the road speed limiter removed, it could reach 40 miles per hour, fast enough to legally drive on public roads in 1938. But that was just the beginning. Inside the cab sat an upholstered double seat with room for a passenger, a radio, an electric heater, safety glass windscreen and windshield wipers, a speedometer, a clock, a rear-view mirror, sun visors, a glove box, a cigarette lighter, chromed bumpers and hubcaps. Minneapolis-Moline's marketing team had surveyed farmers and found that 50% said they wanted a tractor with an enclosed cab. So the company interpreted that data as meaning 50% would buy this. The UDLX was advertised as the machine a farmer could use in the fields all day and drive into town on Saturday night. The price was $2,155. That was roughly double the cost of a standard Minneapolis-Moline Model U, which sold for about $1,000. And in 1938, a brand new Ford Deluxe Tudor sedan cost just $725. For the price of a UDLX, a Depression-era farmer could have bought a regular tractor and a new car and had money left over. At the 1938 National Harvest Festival and Style Show, Minneapolis-Moline unveiled the UDLX to a crowd of approximately 12,000 farmers. The reaction was shock, skepticism, and almost immediate rejection. Only around 150 UDLX comfort tractors were produced between 1938 and 1941. Of those, some estimates say barely 100 were actually purchased by working farmers. Many of the others were returned to the factory unsold or converted back to standard Model U tractors. Most buyers weren't even farmers. They were custom threshermen who needed a fast way to move between jobs on public roads. The UDLX had been a 3-year engineering project. Its failure drained engineering and capital resources at a company already struggling under the weight of the Great Depression. Minneapolis-Moline never recovered enough financial strength to remain independent and was sold to White Motor Corporation in 1963. The brand was retired in 1974. Today, the surviving UDLX comfort tractors, only around 80 are known to exist, sell at auction for over $100,000 apiece. An irony that would be almost funny if the story didn't end in the complete erasure of the company. Number 5. Hart-Parr 3060. Old Reliable. In 1907, the Hart-Parr Company of Charles City, Iowa, introduced a new machine, the 3060 traction engine. It had 2 horizontal cylinders with a 10-inch bore and 12-inch stroke, displacing 1,885 cubic inches. It produced 30 horsepower at the drawbar and 60 horsepower at the belt. It was cooled by oil, an innovation well ahead of its time. Farmers who ran it gave it a nickname that would last for generations: Old Reliable. Between 1907 and 1918, Hart-Parr built and sold 3,798 units of the 3060. That was a staggering production run for the era. The machine helped break open the vast prairies of North America to commercial grain farming in ways that no steam tractor, with its fire risk, enormous water requirements, and prohibitive weight could match. And it was Hart-Parr's sales manager, W.H. Williams, who in 1906 decided that the words traction engine were too long and too vague to use in press releases. He coined the word tractor as a shorthand. The first trade publication advertisement using the word tractor ran in the Implement Trade Journal in the summer of 1907. The company that built the 3060 literally gave the machine its name, a name now used by every manufacturer on Earth. By 1910, Hart-Parr held roughly 70% of the market for internal combustion farm tractors, and then it began to lose ground. Hart-Parr's founders, Charles Hart and Charles Parr, had built the company on the philosophy of big, powerful, heavy-duty machines. But investors and the broader market were shifting towards smaller, lighter, more affordable tractors. Henry Ford had entered the tractor market in 1917 with the Fordson, an inexpensive mass-produced machine that collapsed industry pricing almost overnight. Hart-Parr, still building massive iron giants like the 3060, couldn't pivot fast enough. Charles Hart departed the company he had founded in May 1917, following internal disputes over product direction. Charles Parr followed him out not long after. The company the two men had built from nothing was now being run by people who had neither their vision nor their engineering instincts. By 1929, Hart-Parr had lost enough ground that it was absorbed into a four-company merger that created the Oliver Farm Equipment Company. The Hart-Parr name, the name of the men who invented the tractor, named the tractor, and once held 70% of the market, was used briefly on transitional Oliver Hart-Parr models and then disappeared entirely by the early 1930s. Number 6. Oliver 1900. The Oliver Corporation of the 1960s made some of the finest farm machinery in America, and no machine better represented its engineering ambition than the Oliver 1900, a tractor. Introduced in 1963, the 1900A was one of the first production row crop tractors to offer a six-cylinder diesel engine, producing over 100 horsepower, a landmark achievement in a market where 100 horsepower farm tractors were still considered elite equipment. Oliver's engineers designed the 1900 series to be competitive at the very top of the market. The 1900A ran a GM 453 diesel making around 105 horsepower, while later variants pushed further. These were machines built with precision, with attention to operator comfort, and with the kind of field durability that turned Oliver customers into Oliver loyalists for life. And that loyalty was real. Oliver farmers ran green tractors for decades. They passed them from father to son. When they needed parts, their local dealer had them. When something broke in the field, Oliver's support network fixed it. But in November 1960, everything changed. The White Motor Corporation of Cleveland, Ohio, purchased Oliver. White was a truck and industrial conglomerate that had no particular expertise in farm equipment and no particular love for it either. Over the following decade, White acquired Minneapolis-Moline in 1963, then Cockshut Farm Equipment, and consolidated all three brands under the White Farm Equipment umbrella. The brand names were gradually killed off. The Minneapolis-Moline name was retired in 1974. The last Oliver-branded tractor, an Oliver 2255, rolled off the assembly line on February 13, 1976. Meanwhile, the engineering culture that had produced the 1900A was being systematically dismantled by corporate cost-cutting. Build quality on later White Badge tractors suffered. Dealer confidence eroded. Customer trust, that hard-won generational loyalty that had made Oliver a household name on American farms, cracked. In September 1980, White Motor Corporation filed for bankruptcy. The Oliver 1900A, the 1800 series, the 2255 machines built by engineers who genuinely cared about what they made, were legacy products of a brand that had been used up, squeezed dry, and then abandoned. White's farm equipment division changed hands twice more before eventually landing at AgCO. The 1900A didn't kill Oliver. Corporate indifference did. But it was the 1900A and its fellow machines that bore the cost. Number 7. White Farm Equipment. 4 210 and 4 225. By the late 1970s, White Farm Equipment had consolidated three of the most historically important brands in American agriculture: Oliver, Minneapolis-Moline, and Cockshut, under one roof in a single brand called White. And to carry that unified identity forward, the company introduced a series of powerful four-wheel drive articulated tractors: the White 4150, the 4175, the 4210, and the 4225. The 4225 was the flagship, a 225 horsepower articulated four-wheel drive machine built to compete directly against Steiger and John Deere's 8640 in the large acreage market. These were serious machines, well-engineered and competitively priced. On paper, White had finally assembled the product line it needed to compete seriously at every level of the market. But the company underneath those tractors was a financial catastrophe waiting to happen. White Motor Corporation had never been particularly healthy. It had purchased Oliver, Minneapolis-Moline, and Cockshut not because it had a strategic vision for agriculture, but because it wanted diversified revenue streams. What it got instead was diversified losses. When the farm crisis of the late 1970s arrived, followed by White Motor's truck division problems, the whole structure collapsed simultaneously. In September 1980, White Motor Corporation filed for bankruptcy. In a single court filing, three separate agricultural legends: Oliver, founded in 1855, Minneapolis-Moline, established through a three-company merger in 1929, Cockshut, a beloved Canadian brand dating back to 1877, were all rendered insolvent at once. The 4210 and 4225, the machines White had built as its future, were liquidated as assets in a bankruptcy proceeding. The farm equipment division was sold to TIC Corp., then to Allied Products, then eventually to AG Co. 3 generations of farm equipment heritage erased in a single September morning in a federal court. Number 8. Hart-Parr, Little Devil. Before the 3060, Old Reliable saved Hart-Parr's reputation, there was the machine that almost destroyed it first, the Hart-Parr Little Devil, introduced in 1914. The Little Devil was Hart-Parr's attempt to answer the market demand for a small, lightweight, affordable tractor, a reaction to the growing competition from cheaper single-cylinder machines entering the market. The Little Devil used a single-cylinder, 2-cycle engine mounted in a horizontal configuration with a single-wheel front axle. The entire design was unorthodox, representing a radical departure from everything Hart-Parr had built its name on. It was a disaster. The single front wheel made the tractor dangerously unstable on uneven ground. The engine design was unreliable under sustained field conditions. Farmers who bought Little Devils, and there were buyers, drawn in by the lower price, quickly discovered that the machine didn't behave like the 3060 they trusted. The Little Devil was pulled from production after less than a year, resulting in a significant factory recall, a humiliation for a company whose entire reputation rested on building robust, dependable iron. The financial losses from the Little Devil's failed production run, the cost of recalls, and the damage to Hart-Parr's reputation for reliability forced a significant internal reckoning. The company responded by introducing the 1225 new Hart-Parr, a more conservative, proven design, which helped stabilize the business. But the Little Devil episode had exposed a dangerous weakness at Hart-Parr. When it moved away from the massive, reliable machines it knew how to build, it stumbled badly. That lesson went unlearned. When competitive pressure forced the company to continue pivoting towards smaller, cheaper designs in the early 1920s, Hart-Parr lost ground it never recovered. By 1929, it was absorbed into the Oliver merger. The Little Devil was not the only reason, but it was the first sign of the cracks. Number 9. Ford, TW35, and the collapse of Ford's tractor empire. By the early 1980s, Ford was one of the biggest names in global agriculture. This wasn't just a car company experimenting with tractors. This was a manufacturer that had been building farm machines since the days of the Fordson, a tractor that once dominated the global market. And by 1983, Ford believed it had built one of the most powerful row crop tractors in its history, the TW35. This machine was a beast. A turbocharged diesel pushing around 190 horsepower, a heavy-duty rear end designed for serious field work. A cab that was comfortable, modern, and competitive with anything John Deere or International Harvester was offering at the time. On paper, the TW35 was exactly what large-scale American farmers needed. But timing, once again, was everything. The TW35 arrived right in the middle of the worst agricultural collapse since the Great Depression. Interest rates had exploded past 20. Land values were crashing. Farmers weren't upgrading equipment. They were trying to survive. And Ford had a problem that went far beyond one tractor. Unlike companies that lived and died by agriculture, Ford was a massive global corporation. And inside that corporation, tractors were becoming less and less important. Profit margins were shrinking, competition was intensifying, and the agricultural division simply wasn't delivering the returns Ford expected. Even worse, the TW series, including the TW35, required significant investment in engineering, manufacturing, and dealer support at a time when sales were collapsing, machines were sitting unsold, capital was tied up, and the division started looking like a liability instead of an asset. By 1985 and 1986, Ford made a decision that shocked the farming world. It exited the tractor business. In 1986, Ford sold the majority of its agricultural division to Fiat, an Italian industrial giant. The deal created a new company, Ford New Holland, and eventually even the Ford name disappeared entirely from tractors, replaced by New Holland branding. Think about that for a second. A company that had helped invent the modern tractor market walked away from it. The TW35 wasn't a failure as a machine. Farmers who owned them often respected them. But it became one of the last symbols of Ford's presence in agriculture. A final generation of tractors built just before the company decided the entire industry wasn't worth staying in. The machines survived. The name did not. Number 10. Allis-Chalmers All-Crop Harvester Model 60. The Allis-Chalmers All-Crop Harvester Model 60 was one of the most successful farm machines ever produced in the United States, and ultimately, one of the most poignant symbols of a company's failure to save itself. The all-crop harvester was first introduced in the early 1930s, and the Model 60 became its definitive expression. It was a pull-type combine, meaning it was towed behind a tractor rather than being self-propelled, but what made it extraordinary was its versatility. The Model 60 could harvest soybeans, wheat, oats, rye, barley, buckwheat, flax, clover seed, and dozens of other crops without requiring separate specialized machinery for each. For a small or medium-sized American farm in the 1930s through 1950s, the all-crop Model 60 was the difference between having a harvest and not having one. It sold in enormous numbers. For nearly 3 decades, the all-crop line was the revenue backbone of Allis-Chalmers' agricultural division. It built the brand's reputation for practicality and dependability across millions of American farms. When Allis-Chalmers acquired the Gleaner combine line in the 1950s and began producing the larger self-propelled machines that commercial farmers needed, the all-crop continued to carry smaller operations. For several years in the 1960s and early 1970s, the Gleaner division's profits alone accounted for nearly all of Allis-Chalmers' total farm equipment profits. The orange machines, the all-crop, the Gleaner, the orange tractors bearing model numbers like the 190XT and the 7080 were collectively the most reliable revenue the company had. But the structural problems were always there. Allis-Chalmers was too spread across too many industries, never dominant in any of them, perpetually running third or fourth in every market it touched. The farm crisis of the 1980s didn't create those weaknesses, it simply made them impossible to survive. When Allis-Chalmers sold its agricultural division in 1985 for $107 million, $153 million below book value, the all-crop harvester's long legacy of profitability was one of the assets being liquidated. The machine that had sustained the company through the Depression, through World War II, through decades of competition, became a line item in a fire sale. The Model 60 couldn't save a company whose problems ran too deep and stretched too far. But it had tried for decades harder than anything else on the lot. If you found this video fascinating, hit subscribe. We tell the hidden stories of the industries that shaped the modern world. And if you know someone obsessed with farming history or American manufacturing, share this. We'll see you in the next one.